did set that 1.5% of the general fund from the city budget would go to human services. And that ran for years, and I think it ran fairly well. And so Lucan some years ago began to try to get rid of that. The result was that for the past 5 or so years, human services have been getting roughly 0.6 to 0.7% of the budget. That's an unbelievably small amount of money relative to, let's put it this way, the general fund this year was $379 million. The amount that human services got was $2.6 million. So you can do the math. That's not proportional really at all. So every year, this is what we're facing right now. There's a certain amount of, there's priorities that the city uses to determine who gets the funding. And the priorities have been set for some years now, and they include, I'll just read them here, emergency services and homeless services, youth service, realignment and innovation, and services to persons with disabilities. Currently, Chris Bortz and David Crowley, both council members, have put forth a motion that if it were passed, would remove emergency services and homeless services, as well as services to persons with disabilities, from our city's priorities for funding. So, probably, and let me say it up front, you're probably not surprised to hear that Chris Bortz is behind that, but you're probably shocked to hear that David Crowley is, right? Because Crowley has normally sided with us. And so, I'll address Bortz first, and then we'll move to Crowley. A couple weeks ago, one other person met with Chris in his office. And so I asked him, why are you excluding homelessness from the priority list? And his answer was, he said, well, there's lots of other money coming for homelessness, okay? And he referred to the stimulus package that Congress passed a little bit ago, okay? And there is money coming for homelessness through that. It's for prevention of homelessness and for rapid rehousing. He also referred to things like the emergency shelter grant. And he said, well, all this money coming, so why do we need to put money there? And I said, well, all of those dollars are federal dollars, which is true. They come from the federal government. They are simply passed through the city. If the city did not allocate them to homelessness, they would be in trouble with the federal government. And these dollars show no investment at the city level. There's no sacrifice from the city. It doesn't even come from the city. And so it's a completely false argument to claim that that reflects city priority. And that was his argument. So, and then flip forward to David Crowley. He had the exact same argument. And honestly, they are both sticking to their guns on this. They won't back off on it. And what I've told them is from a coalition perspective, what we think should happen is that we need to get ourselves around the table and lots of other people around the table that represent a diversity of needs in the city and actually hash out what our priorities should be so that we don't have to argue about it later on and we don't have to fight about it later. We can actually have confidence in our priorities. And Chris Bortz said repeatedly, he said, no, it's the job of council. Council's going to do it. You can submit any recommendations you want, but we're going to do it in the end. And completely closed off to collaboration, honestly. And when I was sitting with David Crowley, I said to him, I do not believe that council is able to make this such a big decision on its own in a vacuum. You need to bring citizens in to be a part of this. And he said he disagreed with me, that council could do it. And so at this point where the coalition stands, we cannot be okay with something that excludes homelessness from the priorities for the city. There is no compromise on that. There's no argument that that somehow could be correct, because homelessness is an issue that many of our people in this city are facing. It is on the rise. The economy is not good, and it's something that we can't back down on, in which on the calendar year, agencies would submit applications to the city for funding. And then a group of appointed citizens who made up the Human Services Advisory Commission as well as the CADAB board, two separate groups, would meet. They would meet with the agencies, they would go over the grants, and then they would make recommendations to the city based on what they found as to who should and should not get funded and at what levels and so forth. And so these recommendations were greatly followed by the city government, and that's how it worked. And so this time around, however, the fiscal year, first of all, was changed just for human services. Okay, it was changed from the calendar year to April 1st to March 31st. And so when they changed it, they had to figure out a way to bridge that quarter of the year funding-wise from December to the beginning of the new fiscal year. And so what they said is, they said, well, anybody who's applied and made it through the pre-application process will get 25% of whatever they got last year. And so that's what they did. In addition to that, so we got that, then they combined the two groups of citizens into one group of citizens. And like I said in the past, this group met a lot, went over the grants, things like this. The first week of March, they called the very first meeting of this group of people. They hadn't had other meetings, the very first meeting, and they put before them a list of agencies the city was going to recommend to fund and not fund, the staff had put together. And they said, and this has been corroborated by a couple people that were there, they said you need to rubber stamp this. That's the terminology they used. The people did not get a chance to look over the grants, to talk to anybody about it, anything like that. And they said, we're not going to rubber stamp this. We don't have enough information to say yay or nay to it. And they also saw that it called for cuts of funding to places like YWCA Battered Women's Shelter, Free Store Food Bank, Bethany House Services, and other places. And so they said, no way, we're not doing this. And then, despite that fact, somehow, the city still went ahead with it. And so on March 31st, our agencies received calls that said, hey, tomorrow your funding will stop. And so at that point, we organized, and we figured out that we organized and went down to City Hall. The other side of the coin was that when they funded the agencies for the first quarter of the year at 25%, they didn't pull that from another pocket of money. They pulled that from the money that was allocated for the new fiscal year, which meant that agencies then would only have 9 months of funding to last 12 months. So that would result in about a $700,000 cut to our agencies. In addition to some agencies that have been funded for decades not being funded whatsoever. And so, we put out the call, and we did. We packed City Hall, and we had a good turnout, and really showed that we're strong. And I think Chris Port probably felt like he got hit in the face, surprised that people actually cared, and so we stood up, and we put a lot of pressure on City Hall, a lot of pressure, and because people were strong and did put a lot of pressure, the money was restored in a fairly good manner. The agencies that had been funded the previous year are going to get 85% of their funding from the previous year. Any agency that was funded through the flawed system is going to get 85% of what they were going to be funded, and it just has to last till 2010. It doesn't have to last for 12 months. And in addition, there are processes begun to fix the system. Now, a part of this, quote, fixing of the system is this motion that we've been talking about that's been put forth. And so that's clearly not a fix.